Welcome to the D-Shift podcast, where we provide inspiration, motivation, and education to help you transition from the challenges of divorce to discover the freedom and ability to live life on your own terms. Are you ready? Let's get this shift started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the D-Shift podcast. And today we are going to talk about things that we hear in divorce on the financial side, and we may not completely understand what is going on and what's being discussed, and more importantly, how important the timing of some of these financial decisions is for not only your right now decision, but your long-term decisions. And I have the perfect expert to talk about this with you. I want to introduce Donna Cates. She is the founder of Money Matters Wealth Solutions. She's a financial strategist and a CDFA, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. She specializes in retirement planning as well for women. So she's a great resource, even if you're not going through a divorce. If you're single, or if you're still married, or you're widowed, or you're dealing with all kinds of life transitions, Donna is the person to reach out for that. She really stresses the importance of knowing your decisions and making the most informed decision that works for you to make sure that you have security, real wealth, and that you have an understanding of your options. So, Donna, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Donna, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you were in this area, because there's not a lot of women that kind of move into, the financial side of the divorce planning.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Donna Cates. I live in Birmingham, Alabama. I've been here for 31 years, but I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm a Georgia peach originally. But I ended up in this divorce process because as a financial advisor, number one, there aren't that many female financial advisors, many more now than there was just 20 years ago. But what I found is that a lot of the men that are talking to women about their money are literally seen as talking down to them, saying, "Okay, honey, don't worry about it. I got you." And that's just a horrible place to be. So that's kind of why I stepped up to the plate, and especially in divorce, because I was finding that the attorneys were referring clients to me after the divorces were finalized, and I was finding that a lot of the decisions that they made in that divorce process were costing them a lot of money, a lot in the way of taxes. And I thought, ooh, there's a way to do this better. So that's when I got into the CDFA role so that I could have an impact before women actually started signing on the dotted line.
Right. And thank you for saying that. And I've reached the point now where when clients come to me, when they have any kind of assets, or they're not comfortable, or they're not even really sure what they're looking at dividing up in the divorce, I always recommend that talk to a CDFA first before you talk to an attorney, because once you get a big picture of your money, then when you go to the attorney, you can ask the questions to find out if that attorney is going to be effectively representing you, or if they're going to be resistant to taking information from you or from other professionals, because most attorneys are not financial people. And what looks good on paper is not always good in reality when it comes to the money stuff.
Absolutely. I'm going to give you a very clear example. And it can be something as simple as this. You've got two accounts, $800,000 each. Okay. And it's decided that he's going to keep the retirement assets, $800,000 in a 401k. She's going to take on a $800,000 brokerage account. Sounds equal. Anybody would agree with that. However, when you look at it on an after-tax basis, well, there's a lot of complications. The one that kind of derailed her situation. There were over $500,000 in capital gains taxes in her brokerage account. and it was aggressively invested, and we really needed to reinvest those positions to generate income for her. So selling all of those positions with that high gain was going to cost her $45,000. She heard that and it blew her mind and she did nothing.
Yeah.
So, but that was a hidden cost that she wasn't aware of when she said, okay, yeah, that sounds fair. So just a simple example of how that happens.
Yeah, and I've heard stories. We've all heard the story of somebody getting the house, and I use this one quite often because it's easy to understand. Somebody gets the house in the divorce, fights, spends thousands of dollars to fight to get that house, and then finds out they can't qualify for the mortgage because they don't have the income, and you can't count alimony because it's got to go on for, what is it, 6 months, and it has to be guaranteed for so long through the divorce decree, and all kinds of factors come in. And what logically makes sense does not make sense with a C, right? because
Right.
because it does. And sometimes it's nickel and dime stuff, but sometimes it's big amounts of money people are leaving on the table.
Absolutely. And another thing that I find is around retirement money. For some reason, it seems, and this you may consider this a stereotype, but it seems that a lot of men are very protective of their pensions. So you've got 401ks, and then you've got or all of your ERISA-driven retirement plans, but you also have those pensions. And both of them are marital assets, and they're both, divisible.
Right.
But the men will say, no, you're not getting any of my pension.
Right.
So, women will just say, okay, as long as I'm getting the 401k, some of that money, we're good. Pardon me. I'm sorry, my allergies are acting up. But the reality is that number one, all of the retirement assets need to be included when we're making that division. And it's an equitable division. We're going to split it down the middle. If he's got more than you do, he's the one that's going to be giving up some money. But this is the reason I wanted to mention it. If it's in a 401k or a pension account, you're going to need a qualified domestic relations order to divide those assets to actually get them retitled into your name. And what a lot of women do, this I see this over and over and over. Number one, the divorce decree never addresses who's going to actually do the quadro. Is
Right.
her attorney? Is his attorney? And then a lot of times they wait until after the divorce is finalized to even start preparing the quadro. And it's every plan administrator has their own format for doing it. So, that can delay someone actually getting their retirement assets by not just a month or two, but maybe a year. So, understanding what's required to divide that particular asset is really important.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up those quadros because they are confusing. And I have actually had clients who have in the divorce said, okay, we're going to divide up this pension, and then they've gone to the pension, the fund manager, and that they've said, we can't do that. It doesn't work that way. And so that means what that agreement is no longer valid, at least that part. So then you'd have to go in. Hopefully you would have the ability to go back in and renegotiate it, but you may not based on what your spouse says, right? They may say, well, no, that's what you agreed upon. It was your responsibility to check that.
And once those decisions are made, once that is done, they can't be undone.
Right.
So when it comes to the money stuff.
And now, is it true? Because I've heard different things. Can most attorneys handle a basic quadro, or do you have to go to a special quadro attorney? And that can be several $1,000s. My understanding is going and getting that work done.
Yes, and most attorneys, especially if they are dedicated to divorce work, if they are solely practicing in the divorce field, family law, they're going to know how to do the quadro. But if it's a general practitioner that does a little bit of estate planning, some criminal law, and they probably are not as familiar, and they're more likely to mess things up.
Right.
So, but you can actually, you can ask your attorney, are you comfortable doing the quadro, or would I be better served hiring somebody else to do that for me? Because there are companies out there that do nothing but provide quadros.
Right.
And it's best to have that done correctly than to submit it and it not be correct, because every time that document goes back and forth, it's got to be presented to the judge again.
Right. And it costs. If you're going
Right.
to use an outside company, or even if you're going to use your own attorney, it's going to be billable hours. So do you need to, calculate what the cost of that is going to be? Because it's not like you're nickel and diming people, but it is an inherent cost, and it could be a couple $1,000s, by the time the smoke all cleared, especially if there's errors and things they have to fix. So that's really, thank you for sharing that. Now, here's another one while we're on retirement funds. What about the whole IRA rollover deal? What are some of the mistakes or maybe misunderstandings you hear with that IRA rollover timing and things like that?
So the first thing, like we just discussed, if it's in a numbered account like the 401k, it's still with an employer. It does require that quadro. That's one distinction. But then if it's an IRA, traditional, Roth, simple IRA, or SEP IRA, which are the types of accounts a lot of small business owners might have, those types can be divided without having that quadro, but they do require the divorce decree. And the divorce decree clearly has to say that this is the dollar amount or the percentage of the account that's going to be awarded to you. So someone who is being awarded that can literally take that divorce decree to that broker or that financial institution and say, here's my divorce decree. So what's going to happen is, let's say that my husband has his 401k or his IRA account with Fidelity. I'm going to go to Fidelity and say, I need you to open up an IRA account for me and then transition my share into my name. So we do that. Now, a lot of people I will be working with, they've already selected me as their financial advisor. They can't bring that money directly from that Fidelity account in his name to me at my firm into her name, right? So you're always going to have to open up an account with the person or the company that's holding the funds now. And then once the funds are in that new IRA account in your name, then you can move that to anybody that you want to manage it for you. So that's an extra step that a lot of people are confused over. And then another thing is when people don't understand ahead of time that they may need to be withdrawing some of that money from the retirement accounts prior to making that rollover. If you have a 401k, this doesn't apply to IRA accounts, but just the 401k. The IRS does allow you to take a distribution from that 401k without the 10% penalty. You still have to pay taxes on the amount that you pull out, but you avoid the penalty. But that has to be explicitly written in the divorce decree, and the quadro has to be done properly, and the money has to come out of the 401k before the rest of it rolls into your IRA account. Once it hits the IRA account, now you're going to be subject to those 10% early withdrawal penalties.
So the timing is really critical here. That's what I'm hearing. Like if you're like me and you kind of listen with half an ear, you sort of get the big picture, but you miss the details. I could see myself easily messing that one up, just assuming, well, if I get 10%, doesn't matter whether I'm taking it now or once it gets into my account. But that's not the case if you want to avoid those penalties.
That's right. That's right. And it's one of the reasons that, in my practice as a CDFA, I offer post-divorce planning. I've got a laundry list, a checklist of things that people need to do. The reality is, and you've been through divorce like I have, it's when you get to the end of the divorce, you're just done. You don't want to think about anything else anymore. It's like, oh, I'm finished. But there's still a laundry list of things that need to be done, like getting the quadro process, getting the accounts reinvested into a strategy that's going to support your goals, creating your own post-divorce financial plan. all of those moving pieces, and even updating beneficiary designations on everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a big one. I've had, it's interesting. I was talking to another CDFA. This was probably last year. And she was talking about a lady who had gone through a divorce like 15 years ago and had never done anything with the Quadro. And so she finally went through her divorce papers and found it and thought, well, I don't think I've done this yet. So it was kind of a bit of a hassle to get it all done. But again, you want to make sure that you do this after the divorce, because heaven forbid, if somebody passes away or something, that just becomes a whole other can of worms that gets opened up when
And
those things
very
aren't done.
expensive. Yeah, because you're going to those attorneys.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a little bit about some other things that you think as a CDFA. And I know that you have, I want to throw this in here right now, that you have written a book that's going to be really helpful, A Woman's Guide to Financial Security and Fair Settlements. So I think that's a really good place to start if you want to get general information. I still think working with the CDFA, this is not a do-it-yourself project. If you,
Right.
reaching out and talking to a professional, because it's so easy to miss those things. What are some of the other common issues that you see people that are doing the do-it-yourself kind of divorces, or even just relying on an attorney for financial advice, which unfortunately a lot of people still do? What are some of the common mistakes or forced errors or unforced errors that you see people making?
I will tell you the biggest and the most costly and probably the most emotionally devastating is around whether or not they're going to keep the marital home or give it up. Because again, there's so many moving pieces to whether you keep that home. You've already mentioned, I'm gonna keep the home. And if I'm gonna keep the home, that means I've got to have the mortgage refinanced in just my name. Am I going to qualify? Do I have the earnings? Do I have the credit worthiness? And alimony, if you're getting alimony for 5 years, that 5 years of alimony is not going to be counted as income for you qualifying for a 30-year marriage. It just doesn't work. Okay.
Right.
But you need to know that before you say, yes, I'll take the house and I want to refinance it into my name. Because if you go to refinance post divorce and you find out that you can't qualify, now all you can do is sell the house. So
Right.
you're forced into a decision. That's a big one too. And then a lot of people will say, well, I can afford that mortgage. I got the mortgage payment, whatever it is. I can afford that, but they don't take into consideration what it costs to operate the home, doing the roof repairs, replacing the furnace when it goes out, the yard maintenance, pool maintenance, those types of things.
Right.
So it's not just about, the mortgage, although that's a big piece of it. There's a lot of moving pieces financially to that. And you also have to have enough money to buy out your spouse's share of the equity in the home.
Right.
So the house in itself is just a big bundle of opportunities for mess up.
Yeah, and you don't want to be house rich and cash poor. Like, you don't want to live in a lovely house and be eating ramen noodles and craft dinner for the next 30 years. And
Yeah.
there is and I know there's an emotional component to homes. I get that. But there's also something really positive about starting afresh and getting a place that maybe doesn't have all especially if it was a difficult marriage, that doesn't have all those kind of negative vibes going on. And one of the big mistakes, I heard a real estate agent say this, and I just thought she said it so beautifully. Your adult kids probably don't want your home. So if you're holding on to it because you think your adult kids want it, maybe sit down and have a real conversation with them and say, look, do you want this home, or do you have, would you just sell it when I'm gone anyhow? And having that conversation, because a lot of times we think that the adult kids want it and they don't want to move back to that home. They got their own place now. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and I find that the ones that are the most typically emotionally attached to the home are those that have young children.
Yes.
They don't want to disrupt their school. If they might have to change school districts, or just that's the only home the kids have known. But again, the fresh start is so, so valuable for everybody, not just, the person divorcing, but the children as well.
Yeah, and so yes, there are some really good reasons to keep your home. And if you love it and you can afford it and you want to stay, by all means, stay. But kids can adjust to living in a new house. I mean, people have jobs where they move every few years and they have families and, you know, these things happen. People do move. It's not often as devastating as we think it's going to be for everybody involved. But
Right.
I love this idea of just being really focused on your financial matters, and having that expert to walk you through these steps. Is
And
there
I think the one thing that I love about it is that nobody wants to make poor decisions.
Yeah,
We know we don't. But when you take into consideration that while you're in this divorce process, you're already on an emotional roller coaster, so
right.
you may not be thinking as rationally as you normally would. So working with a professional who can be kind of the outsider looking in, and then providing you with all those layers of education, it just really helps you get a better understanding and the logic behind why someone's recommending something. And you're not relying on what the attorney says, because again, the attorney is not trained as a financial advisor and definitely isn't projecting what your financial future is going to look like.
Right. And that is so true, because if you think of all the times, I know when I look back, and I didn't have kids involved in our divorce, and I was actually my divorce, and I was actually I was the spouse that made the most money on a consistent basis in my first marriage. And even then, the thing that I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and just I couldn't get it out of my head was finances. And I was like in my 30s when I went through that. Now, I couldn't imagine now in my 60s going through a divorce where I was like thinking, I would like to start like withdrawing from my retirement or retiring. I don't actually ever want to retire, but if I wanted to, I don't, and then thinking, but I'm already 60. How am I going to do this? And the older you get, the more strategic you have to be. You can't make those kind of mistakes.
Absolutely. And yeah, everybody knows they have the term gray divorce now
Yes.
because
Yeah.
there are so many happening for those 50 and older. And it is a totally different conversation because either you're already retired or you're thinking about retiring, and that may not be on the table anymore. We have to kind of redo and reevaluate, the spending and the income sources that you have. But that's another thing, with the retirement money that you get, if you're working with a professional, what that person's going to be able to do for you is to say, okay, here's what you walked away from the divorce with. This is what you have right now. We're actually going to help you understand not just this pile of accounts that you have, various types of accounts. We're going to help you understand how that's going to support your lifestyle today and in the future. So we're actually planning on what resources are available to use now versus what are we going to let continue to grow for retirement, whether that's 3 years from now or 15 years from now.
Right, right. Donna, you have shared a ton of information out of everything we've talked about. And I mean, this is like we're condensing all your expertise and 30 years of experience down into a 20-minute conversation here. So there's obviously lots more stuff we could have gone into. But what do you think is the most important thing you'd like people listening to this podcast to remember?
I think the most important thing for anybody is you've got to take your head out of the sand when it comes to the money stuff. So many women do not have a seat at the financial table, not because they're not competent or deserving, but they just kind of let it go. They let somebody else take care of it. So, and I tell this to every person, every woman that I speak to, it doesn't matter if you're divorcing or not, at some point you'll be on your own because women outlive men.
Right.
50% of us get divorced. The rest of us, we live longer than our spouse. So take your head out of the sand when it comes to money stuff. You don't have to be an expert at everything, but have an expert on your team, somebody that you can work with to help you make informed decisions.
Yeah. Sometimes you just have to know what you don't know. And then you can recognize, yes, I need to have somebody like Donna on my team working with me. So, Donna, tell us again the name of your book.
The name of the book is A Woman's Guide to Financial Security and Fair Settlement, with the tagline, Because She is Her Own Financial Plan.
Love that. And it is available on Amazon. I will have the link to get Donna's book from Amazon right in the show notes. And Donna, if women want to reach out, find out more about what you do and work with you, what's the best way to do that?
The best place to connect with me is going to be on my website, and that's moneymatterswealth.com.
Excellent. Donna, thank you so much for being here. It is always fun to talk to you. And when you said women have to get their head out of there, I was thinking, what word is she going to use there? And you said sand.
Keeping it clean.
Donna, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing all your wisdom. I really do appreciate it.
And I appreciate you too. Thank you so much.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of the D-Shift podcast. And don't forget to tune in to the next one. Thanks for listening and supporting the D-Shift podcast. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, join the D-Shift crew. For more details and to sign up, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen and click on the podcast page.